The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel through panic. My shoes clattered against the linoleum floor, each echo louder than the last, blending with the sharp scent of disinfectant that clawed at my throat. My heart pounded in my ears, in my neck, in every trembling part of my 66-year-old body as I searched for room 312. My son, my only son, Robert. Emergency admission. Those words had come through the phone 40 minutes earlier, spoken by Scarlett, his wife, in the same cold voice she always used with me. Robert is in the hospital. Accident. Come if you want. Then she hung up. No details, no comfort, just that clipped cruelty that had become her signature. Now, running down that sterile corridor, numbers blurred before my eyes. 308, 310, almost there. I clutched my purse like a shield, whispering silent prayers between gasps. All I wanted was to see him, to hold his hand, to tell him everything would be okay. That's what mothers do. We fix what's broken. We heal what hurts, even when no one sees us anymore. But before I could reach the door, a hand grabbed my arm. Firm, urgent. A woman's voice whispered near my ear. Hide. Don't make a sound. Trust me. It was a nurse, mid-40s maybe, with tired eyes that carried something fierce and secret. Before I could question her, she pushed me gently into the half-open door of the empty room next to Robert's. Wait here. Watch. Listen. You'll understand. Then she was gone, her shoes clicking down the hallway. I stood frozen in the dim room, pressed against the cold wall, trying to catch my breath. Why hide? What could she possibly mean? But something in her tone, an urgency that felt like warning, kept me still. I waited, heart hammering, as voices echoed outside. Scarlett's voice came first, soft and sugary, followed by a man's, calm and businesslike. Are you sure no one will see us here? He asked. The old woman's on her way, Scarlett replied with a dry laugh that scraped against my skin. We have time. The guards won't let her through quickly. Old woman. That's what she called me. I bit my lip hard, staying silent. Good, the man continued. Then let's finalize the documents. The transfer of the house must be ready before he wakes up. If he asks, you'll tell him he signed everything before the accident. The house. My house. The home I'd bought with my late husband's insurance money. And put in Robert's name because I trusted him. Because he was my son. My chest tightened as the man's next words cut through the air. And the joint account? $200,000. I can handle that, Scarlett said smoothly. Once I get guardianship, I'll have full access. No one will question the wife of a dying man. The lawyer's tone turned clinical. If he doesn't wake up, or wakes with cognitive damage, you'll inherit everything. It's all airtight. If he doesn't wake up. My pulse stopped. Then Scarlett spoke again, her voice lowering to a casual whisper that chilled me more than any scream could. I've been adding the crushed pills to his orange juice each morning. Just half a tablet more each week. The doctors think it's stress. Here at the hospital, it's easier. I can add things to the fourth. They tell me to be strong. It's almost comical. In a few days, it'll look like heart failure. Perfectly natural. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle the sound that wanted to rip from my throat. My son wasn't dying from an accident. He was being murdered. Poisoned by the woman he loved, the woman I'd trusted. My legs gave out, and I slid down the wall, shaking so violently I could barely breathe. The lawyer gathered his papers. You'll receive the property transfer tonight. By Friday, everything will be yours. I was never here. Thank you, Mark, Scarlett replied. You'll be well compensated. Their footsteps faded, leaving me alone with the echo of their crimes. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My son, my boy, was lying just a few feet away, dying slowly while his wife plotted to inherit his life. The door creaked open again, and I nearly screamed. It was the same nurse. She closed the door quickly and crouched beside me, her badge read, Letitia Sanchez. Her eyes were steady. "Breathe," she said. "I heard everything. I've been watching her for weeks. Your son's symptoms match poisoning, anticoagulants most likely. My sister died that way. I promised myself I'd never let it happen again." Her voice trembled, but her resolve did not. She showed me a chart on her phone, numbers, levels, red lines that screamed danger. "Dr. Stevens is testing his IV right now. If we find proof, we'll call the police. But we need time, evidence. I'll handle security. You must go to your son. Pretend you know nothing. Cry. Hug her. Be the mother she thinks you are. Can you do that?" I swallowed hard. Pretend. Lie to a killer. Every part of me screamed no, but my son's life depended on it. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll do it. But promise me, she won't win." Letitia's eyes burned with quiet fire. "I promise. She'll spend the rest of her life paying for what she's done." She opened the door and gave me a nod. The hallway seemed endless again, filled with voices and footsteps and the hum of machines. I walked toward room 312, every step a war between terror and determination. I pushed open the door. My son lay motionless under white sheets, pale as chalk, machines whispering around him. And there, beside his bed, sat Scarlett. Beautiful, composed, the picture of grief. When she saw me, she gasped theatrically and stood to embrace me. "Doris," she whispered, pressing her cheek to mine. "Thank you for coming." Her perfume smelt like lilies and lies. The hug lasted a heartbeat too long, like she needed time to arrange her face. When she pulled back, her eyes were glossy, her voice a soft tremor. She launched into the story she had rehearsed. Sudden pain at the office, an ambulance, stress, poor habits, the usual platitudes folded into concern. I nodded in all the right places and took Robert's free hand. It was cool and dry, the silence between his breaths louder than any machine. "He's strong," I said, and even managed a small smile. Scarlett squeezed my shoulder as if we were allies. I kept my gaze on my son, so she wouldn't see the fury gathering behind my eyes. Minutes passed like hours. I leaned close to Robert and whispered small, true things. Memories of chocolate chip pancakes at 7:15 a.m., the blue bike from his 9th birthday, the way he used to hold my index finger with his whole hand. Across the bed, Scarlett watched, immaculate in her cream dress, every strand of hair in place. She spoke about hope and prayer and, if he wakes, letting the phrase land in the room like a seed she expected to root. I swallowed the scream in my throat. Letitia's plan required a performance. So I performed. At 12:06 p.m., a cart rattled past the open doorway. Letitia appeared, her tone brisk and ordinary. "Mrs. Salazar," she said, using my married name with professional respect. "Dr. Stevens needs a quick signature for insurance intake." 2 minutes, Scarlett hesitated, a flicker of suspicion in the tilt of her head. "I can sign for him," she offered. "I'm the wife." Letitia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's about next of kin notification if we move him. Policy is to speak with his mother as well." It was both true and bait. Scarlett relented. I brushed Robert's forehead and followed Letitia into a consultation room that smelled faintly of toner and lemon wipes. "The lab confirmed it," she said the moment the door closed. "Warfarin, high levels, not prescribed. Dr. Stevens has already secured the IV and notified administration. Security is pulling the last 24 hours of video. The police are en route with a warrant. We need 15 to 20 minutes. The number steadied me, a clock I could fight. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Keep her here, keep her calm, keep her talking," Letitia said. "No heroics, no accusations. If she bolts, it gets harder, And Doris, don't drink anything she offers. Even in terror, I huffed a dry laugh. You couldn't pay me. Back in 312, Scarlett was smoothing the blanket with delicate fingers, the gesture so tender that, if I hadn't heard her in the hallway, I might have believed it. I asked Father Thomas to come around 4 p.m., she said without looking up. Blessings help, even if you don't believe. I believe in truth, I said mildly, and sat. I let silence sit between us until she had to fill it. She did, with talk of bills and schedules and how men like Robert never learned to rest. When she risked a quick glance to the IV bag, I placed my palm on Robert's wrist, as if to anchor him, and her eyes flicked back to my face. At 12:24 p.m., I played my line. Scarlett, I owe you an apology, I said, catching her gaze, her pupils eased, curiosity diluting vigilance. I've been distant, I continued, afraid of losing him. I don't want that anymore. When he wakes up, I'd like us to plan something together. A bigger place for the family you'll have. I've set aside some savings for your down payment. Not much, but it's something. The greed moved through her like a pulse, just a shimmer, gone as quickly as it came. That's generous, she murmured. You don't have to do that. I want to. I lied. I want you to know I'm on your side. I squeezed her hand. It was warm, steady, practiced. The hallway thickened with movement around 12:31 p.m. Voices, footfalls, the kind of purposeful hush that tells you something official is forming. Scarlett heard it too, her shoulders tensed, chin angling toward the door. I leaned forward and asked about vacations they'd taken, holidays I'd been too proud to attend. She warmed to the topic, recounting a beach with water like glass, a hotel with linen sheets. She laughed once, a bell made of ice, and for a surreal moment, I wondered how many jokes she had told while measuring poison. At 12:37 p.m., the door opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped in first, followed by a woman in a charcoal suit whose badge flashed like a clean blade. Behind them came Letitia and Dr. Stevens. Scarlett rose halfway, her smile uncertain, then slid into a frown she couldn't assemble into charm. What is this? She asked, voice high at the edges. The suited woman spoke with calm authority. Miss Fernandez, also known as Karen Fields, I'm Detective Audrey Ruiz. We need you to accompany us to answer questions regarding your husband's condition. Scarlett's denial came fast and brittle. This is absurd. My husband is very ill. You're upsetting him. Dr. Stevens stepped forward, all medicine and facts. We found warfare in Mr. Salazar's fourth, levels inconsistent with any order I gave. Security footage shows you manipulating the line on 3 separate occasions in the last day. Letitia tapped her phone and set it to speaker. Scarlett's own voice spilled into the room, smooth and unmistakable. I've been giving him crushed pills in his orange juice. The doctors think it's stress. Here at the hospital, I can add things to the IV. In 2 or 3 more days, it will all be over. All the blood left her face. For a heartbeat, she was a statue. Then a cornered animal. That recording is illegal, she snapped. Taken out of context. Detective Ruiz didn't blink. We also have your email exchanges with attorney Mark Delgado regarding fraudulent property transfers, obtained with warrant. Mr. Delgado is cooperating. Additionally, we recovered footage from the parking lot 3 days ago in which you state, "Soon I'll be free." You are under arrest for attempted murder and fraud. The cuffs clicked at 12:41 p.m., a sound that landed in my bones like a prayer answered. Scarlett twisted toward me as the officers moved her to the door. Her eyes were no longer green. They were flat and venom dark. You meddling old woman, she hissed. He'll never believe you. When he wakes up, You won't, I said quietly. Justice isn't a story you get to tell. She lunged, as if to spit another line, but the officer at her elbow guided her through the threshold. Her voice thinned in the corridor. then disappeared. The strength that had kept me upright evaporated. My knees softened. The chair caught me like a net. Letitia's hand was on my shoulder, steady, present. Dr. Stevens spoke in a tone meant for families who live inside beeping rooms. We've already initiated reversal. High-dose vitamin K, plasma, monitoring. He's young, and his heart is resilient. We caught it in time. The clock above the sink read 12:46 p.m. I pressed my forehead to Robert's hand and let 2 tears fall. Not for grief now, but for the slim, bright edge of hope. Detective Ruiz returned at 1:18 p.m., details in a tidy folder and a coffee that tasted like mercy. "She'll be booked without bail," she said. "We'll need statements when you're ready. And, Ms. Salazar, Karen Fields has priors across 2 states. Different names, similar schemes. Men who lost everything survived to tell us what they couldn't prove then. This time, we have the proof." I nodded, the room tilting back toward balance. Outside the window, a wedge of sky shone the color of clean slate. Machines hummed. My son's chest rose and fell. I pulled the chair close enough to feel the fragile warmth of his arm. "We're here," I whispered, at 1:26 p.m., voice steady at last. "We're not letting go." The hours that followed blurred into the slow rhythm of machines. Nurses moved quietly, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. I stayed by Robert's side, fingers tracing the veins on his hand like a map I'd once known by heart. When the sedative wore off, his eyelids fluttered, and for the first time in days, color returned to his face. "Mom?" His voice was fragile, a thread between sleep and waking. "I'm here," I whispered, gripping his hand tighter. "You're safe." He blinked against the harsh light. "Scarlett?" "She's gone," I said gently. "There was a mistake. But it's over now." He didn't ask for details. Maybe some part of him already knew. Grief and shame flickered in his eyes, the kind that comes from realizing you've been sleeping beside betrayal. I brushed his hair back, and he let out a broken laugh. "You never liked her." "I wanted to," I said softly. "For you." For a moment, silence sat between us, the kind that doesn't need words. He squeezed my fingers weakly, then fell back asleep, the steady beeping of the monitor the only sound left in the room. By evening, Leticia came back, exhaustion etched deep into her face. "She's in custody," she said. "Detective Ruiz says the evidence is ironclad. It's over." I reached for her hand. "You saved him. You saved me." She shook her head. "You did that the moment you stayed quiet. Most mothers would have run out there screaming." "I wanted to," I admitted. But a mother's fear is nothing compared to her purpose. Later that night, when the corridors emptied and the hum of the hospital softened, I stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer through the glass. I thought of all the mothers sitting in rooms like this, waiting, praying, holding on to love with shaking hands. And I realized something that would carry me through the rest of my life. You can lose everything, but if your love still has courage, you're not truly powerless. The next morning, Robert woke again, stronger this time. The first words he said were, "I'm sorry, Mom." I smiled, tears burning the corners of my eyes. "You don't owe me sorry. You owe yourself a new beginning." Weeks later, the trial made headlines. The perfect wife who tried to kill her husband for his mother's home. But I didn't read the articles. The world could keep its noise. I had my son back, and when he finally walked out of that hospital, thinner, quieter, but alive, I knew that this was what grace looked like. Before we left, I found Leticia one last time. "If you ever need anything," I told her, pressing a folded card into her palm, "my door will always be open." She smiled through tired eyes. "You already gave me what I needed," she said. "Proof that the right people still fight back." That night, back in my own kitchen, I brewed coffee, opened the curtains, and watched dawn rise over the quiet street. The house smelled like peace again, because sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers, steady and certain, through the hands of a mother who refuses to look away. If you believe love is stronger than evil, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and stay for the next story. Some truths, like courage, deserve to be shared. 2 months later, the world outside my window had softened again. Spring sunlight poured through the lace curtains. The magnolia tree on the lawn had begun to bloom, and for the first time in years, I felt safe in my own home. Robert had moved back in temporarily during his recovery. Each morning, I would find him sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee steaming in front of him, quietly staring at the backyard where his father used to plant tomatoes. "Morning, sweetheart," I'd say, just like when he was a boy. He'd look up, smile faintly, and answer, "Morning, Mom." There was guilt in that smile. The kind that doesn't fade easily, but also gratitude, the kind that rebuilds something broken, one day at a time. His therapist said healing takes time. I told her time is something a mother has plenty of. Scarlett's trial stretched on for weeks. She pleaded not guilty, tried to blame stress, grief, even me. The recordings, the lab reports, and the forged property documents said otherwise. The jury needed less than 3 hours. Attempted murder, fraud, 15 years. I didn't go to the sentencing. I didn't need to see her face again. Instead, I went to the hospital chapel. It was empty, quiet, lit only by sunlight through colored glass. I sat on the last pew, clutching my rosary, and whispered a prayer I never thought I'd be strong enough to say. Forgive her, not for her sake, for mine, because anger had been eating at me like rust, and I wanted to live the rest of my life light. When Robert was discharged, we decided to start something new. A foundation in Leticia's name, the Sanchez Fund for Patient Protection, dedicated to training nurses to identify signs of medical abuse. The first donation came from my savings, the next from Robert's reinstated insurance claim. A local newspaper wrote about it, calling me the mother who turned pain into purpose. I didn't care for the headline. What mattered was that something good had survived. One afternoon, as we packed boxes for the foundation's small office downtown, Robert stopped and looked at me. "You know," he said quietly, "if you hadn't believed in me, I might not have wanted to come back." I smiled, brushing dust off an old picture frame. You don't stop being a mother because your child forgets who he is. You wait until he remembers. He hugged me, really hugged me. For the first time since he was a teenager, his heartbeat pressed against mine, steady and alive. And in that moment, I knew every sleepless night, every prayer, every fear had been worth it. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just one sentence, written in shaky, familiar handwriting. "I can't undo what I've done, but I hope one day you'll believe I was more than my mistakes." It was from Scarlett. I sat at the kitchen table a long time, reading that line over and over. Then I folded the letter, placed it inside the family Bible, and whispered, "You were never more than your choices." That night, I made tea and stood by the window. The magnolias outside had opened fully, their white petals glowing in the porch light. Robert was asleep upstairs, and the house hummed softly with the sound of peace rediscovered. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. Love, I thought, is not what you say when things are easy. It's what you prove when everything falls apart. And maybe, just maybe, some miracles come disguised as mothers who refuse to give up. If you stayed with me until now, tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven her, or would you have walked away forever? And don't forget to follow for the next story, because every heartbreak carries a lesson, and every lesson deserves to be heard. The following months settled into something gentle. Robert slowly rebuilt his life piece by piece. Therapy, work from home, physical rehab, all the quiet acts that stitched him back into himself. The doctors called him lucky. I called him proof. Some evenings, we'd sit on the porch together, the sun bleeding gold through the maples. He'd sip tea, and I'd knit. And every so often he'd say, "You ever think about Dad?" Or, "You ever miss the noise?" I'd smile. "I miss the good parts," I'd tell him, "and I'm learning to forgive the rest." Leticia visited once a week, bringing hospital updates and stories about the new nurses the foundation had helped train. She had that same brisk kindness, that quiet strength. "They're calling you a hero again," she said once, half teasing. I shook my head. No, I just stayed long enough to tell the truth. One crisp October morning, we planted a magnolia tree in the front yard, a living memorial for everything we'd survived. The air smelled of earth and promise. Robert knelt beside me, pressing soil around the roots. "You think it'll grow?" he asked. "It already is," I said. The following spring, pink blossoms crowned the branches. Children from the neighborhood stopped to stare at them on their way to school. Sometimes I'd see strangers pause, touch the bark, smile. Life had come full circle, proof that beauty grows best where pain once lived. I keep the letter from Scarlett tucked away, not out of anger, but as a reminder. People can destroy, deceive, and still, somehow, leave behind a chance for others to rebuild. That's what forgiveness is. Not erasing the past, but refusing to let it define the future. So if you've ever been betrayed, lied to, or left to pick up pieces someone else broke, hear me when I say this. You will bloom again. Maybe not where you expected, maybe not the way you planned, but you will, because love, real love, doesn't end in loss. It ends in strength. Thank you for listening to my story. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what does forgiveness mean to you? Maybe your words will be the ones that help someone else start over. Summer came, and with it a new rhythm of living, quiet, deliberate, and beautifully ordinary. The foundation had grown beyond anything I imagined. Nurses sent handwritten letters about the patients they'd helped. Families sent photos of loved ones who'd survived because someone finally noticed the signs. Every story felt like a small redemption, a ripple of good that began with pain but didn't end there. Robert was different now, too. He laughed more. He stopped checking his phone for messages that would never come. Sometimes he'd sit with me at the kitchen table, helping with grant applications or just reading the newspaper aloud, his voice calm and steady again. The shadows that used to live behind his eyes were slowly replaced by light. One evening, while we watched the sunset stain the sky orange, he said quietly,
"You know, Mom, I think I'm finally okay."
I smiled. "Then I can rest easy." He turned to me, the corners of his mouth lifting. "No, you don't rest. You rebuild." I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from deep inside, where grief used to live. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe rebuilding is just another kind of rest." That weekend, the foundation held its first community event, a small gathering at the hospital garden where patients, nurses, and families came together. There were paper lanterns strung across the trees, lemonade in glass pitchers, and a soft jazz band playing near the fountain. Leticia gave a short speech about awareness, and then she gestured to me. "This all began with one woman's courage to speak when it mattered most," she said. The crowd turned, and for a moment I saw my life flash like film reels. The night I found the pill bottle, the fear, the hospital room, the trial, the forgiveness. It all led here, a place where something broken became something whole. Afterward, Robert came up with a bouquet of white magnolias, the first blooms from our tree. He tucked one into my hand.
"You did this," he said. "You turned what tried to destroy us into something that saves others."
I looked at the petals glowing under the garden lights. "No," I said softly. "We did this." We just refused to stay buried. As the evening faded, I watched the lanterns drift upward into the dark. Hundreds of small, trembling lights carrying prayers and hope into the sky. Somewhere in that moment, I realized that survival wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of another one. One built not on fear or loss, but on legacy. So if you're listening, wherever you are, remember this. What breaks you doesn't get the final word. What you rise from does. Thank you for being here. Tell me in the comments below, what's one thing you've risen from that made you stronger? Your story might be the light someone else is waiting for. Autumn returned again, soft and golden, the kind of season that teaches you how to let go gently. The magnolia tree outside had grown taller than the window now, its leaves turning bronze and drifting across the yard. Every morning I'd find Robert sweeping them up, humming the same old tune his father used to whistle. Life had become steady, peaceful. The foundation ran itself most days. I spent my mornings tending the garden, my afternoons volunteering at the hospital. Sometimes, young nurses would stop me in the hall saying, "Mrs. Williams, your story gave me courage." I'd smile, touch their hands, and think, maybe that's what purpose really is. The quiet passing of courage from one heart to another. One day, I received a call from the warden's office. It startled me at first. Scarlett had requested a visit. Robert was hesitant. "You don't have to see her," he said, his voice protective but calm. "I know," I told him, "but I think I need to." A week later, I found myself walking through the echoing corridors of the Women's Correctional Facility. The air smelled of metal and bleach, but somewhere under it, faintly, there was something human. Soap, paper, dust. When I entered the small visiting room, she was already there. Her hair was shorter, her posture smaller. The arrogance that once cloaked her was gone. For a long moment, we just looked at each other through the glass. Finally, she spoke. "You came." "I did." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I've been going to counseling. They say I should make amends." I said nothing, waiting. Her voice trembled. "I thought if I had enough, I'd finally feel safe. I don't even know who I was back then." I leaned forward slightly. "You were lost. We all are, until we're not." Tears welled in her eyes. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said truthfully. "But I don't think about you much anymore. That's how I know I've forgiven you." She exhaled, shaking. He's doing well?" "He is," I said softly. "He's rebuilding, just like me." A tear slid down her cheek. "Good. That's good." The guard tapped his watch. 5 minutes left. I stood. "Take care of yourself, Scarlett," I said. "When you get out, don't waste your freedom. Make something beautiful out of it." She nodded, sobbing quietly. "Thank you for coming." As I walked out into the cool afternoon, I realized something simple and profound. Closure isn't an event. It's a choice. It's what happens when you decide the story doesn't get to end in bitterness. That night, I sat on the porch with Robert. The air smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. He asked softly, "How did it feel, seeing her again?" "Like turning the last page of a book," I said. "One I finally don't need to reread." He smiled, nodding. "Then it's done." "Yes," I said. "It's done." The wind moved gently through the magnolia leaves, carrying their rustle into the night. I closed my eyes and listened, not for ghosts or regrets, but for peace. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain. If this ending found you at the right time, tell me below. What would your last page look like? And stay with me for the next story, because every ending, if you let it, is only the beginning of grace. Winter settled softly that year, the kind that carries silence rather than sadness. Snow feathered over the magnolia tree, the branches bending slightly under its weight but never breaking. I often stood by the window with a cup of tea, watching the flakes swirl under the porch light like time itself refusing to hurry. Robert had moved into his own apartment downtown, but visited every Sunday without fail. He always brought groceries, though half of them I didn't need. "Old habits," he'd say with that grin that used to be a stranger to his face. Sometimes, after dinner, he'd sit at the piano his father once played, letting the music drift through the house like forgiveness turned into sound. One night, as he played, I realized the home no longer echoed with what we'd lost. It hummed with what we'd rebuilt. The foundation kept growing. We expanded to 3 states, trained hundreds of nurses, and created emergency grants for patients' families. Each time a new story reached me, a woman saved because someone recognized the warning signs, I'd close my eyes and whisper a quiet thank you to the world, not for the pain, but for what it taught me. And then, one snowy afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, careful, humble. "Mrs. Williams, my name is Clara. I share a cell with Scarlett. She told me everything. She said you gave her the only mercy she didn't deserve, forgiveness. I wanted you to know she's teaching literacy classes now. She says it's because of you." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, reading those words until the ink blurred with my tears. That night I stepped outside. The world was quiet, blanketed in white. I looked up at the magnolia tree, bare now, but still standing tall. I thought about everything that had happened, every heartbreak that had somehow led me home to myself, and I smiled, because maybe that's what grace really is. Not a miracle that erases the past, but the quiet endurance of something that keeps growing after the storm. If you're still here with me at the end of this story, thank you. Tell me in the comments, do you believe people can truly change? And remember, even in winter, the magnolia is only resting. Spring always comes back. By the time spring returned, the magnolia tree outside had burst into bloom again, soft pink petals trembling against the morning light. I stood on the porch with my tea, listening to the hum of bees weaving through the branches, and realized the house no longer felt like a place of waiting. It felt alive again. Robert arrived just after 9, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a small envelope. "For you," he said, smiling. I raised an eyebrow. "Another foundation update?" "Not this time," he said. "It's a letter from the governor's office." Inside was a simple note, a formal commendation for the Sanchez Fund, honoring our work in hospital safety reform. At the bottom was a handwritten line, "Your courage has saved lives you'll never know." I set the letter down and laughed softly. "Your father used to say that about quiet kindness," I told Robert, "that its echo is longer than applause." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes warm. "You should be proud, Mom." "I am," I said, "but not of what we did, of who we became." We spent the rest of the morning in the garden, planting daffodils around the magnolia roots. The air smelled like rain and new beginnings. Every time Robert dug into the soil, I saw pieces of his old self, the one Scarlett had tried to erase, coming back in small, steady gestures. Later, Leticia stopped by with her daughter, a bright-eyed teenager named Mia. She ran up the steps holding a framed photo from the foundation's first event. "Mom says this belongs here," she said shyly. It was the picture of me under the lanterns, smiling at the sky. We hung it in the hallway, next to a faded portrait of Robert as a boy. 2 lives, 2 beginnings, side by side. That evening, when everyone had gone, I sat alone by the piano. The magnolia blossoms glowed outside like lanterns against the dusk. I opened my old notebook, the one I'd kept through everything, and began writing again. Not about pain or betrayal this time, but about what came after. There will come a day when the house no longer remembers the sound of anger, only laughter echoing down the hall. When forgiveness won't feel like surrender, but like peace you built with your own hands. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and watched the last light fade over the magnolia tree. Life hadn't given me back what I lost. It had given me something rarer, the strength to live without needing it. And in that quiet, I finally understood the truth my story had been trying to tell me all along. The happiest endings are never about getting everything back. They're about finding yourself in what remains. Thank you for listening to my story. Tell me in the comments, what have you learned to grow from instead of grieve for? Because sometimes that's where the real story begins. Summer drifted in quietly that year. Long evenings, soft winds, the kind of light that lingers as if it doesn't want to leave. The magnolia tree had grown taller, its blossoms fewer now but fuller, heavier with scent. Every morning I'd open the curtains and see it framed perfectly through the kitchen window, like a painting hung by time itself. Robert was thriving. He'd joined the foundation full-time, managing outreach programs and mentoring young staff. Sometimes I'd hear him on the phone, his voice steady, patient. The voice of a man who had learned what kindness costs and why it's still worth paying. When I told him I was proud, he'd grin and say, "I learned from the best," before stealing the last piece of cornbread on the counter. One afternoon, I received an email from a local college. They were hosting a symposium on ethics and empathy in modern medicine and wanted me to speak as the keynote guest. I almost laughed when I read it. Me, a retired waitress turned accidental advocate. But Robert encouraged me. "Tell your story," he said. "It's not just yours anymore." So I did. The day of the event, the auditorium smelled faintly of dust and coffee. The crowd was larger than I expected. Nurses, doctors, students, people with notebooks in their laps and hope in their eyes. I stood behind the podium, my heart beating hard enough to shake the paper in my hand. But when I looked out, I saw Letitia sitting in the front row, smiling like a quiet anchor. And suddenly, the words came easy. I told them about fear, about how it creeps into the smallest corners of a home, about trust, how fragile it is, how easily disguised. I spoke of mistakes, forgiveness, and the kind of love that survives even betrayal. And when I finished, there was silence. Not the kind that comes from indifference, but the kind that means people are holding their breath. Then the applause came, soft at first, then thunderous. Afterward, a young woman approached me. "My mom's a nurse," she said, tears bright in her eyes. "She almost quit last year. Your story made her stay." I touched her hand and smiled. Then that makes everything worth it. That night, back home, I sat on the porch with Robert and Letitia. Fireflies blinked lazily across the yard. The magnolia tree rustled softly in the breeze. "You know," Letitia said, "that speech might have changed some lives." I smiled. Maybe. Or maybe it just reminded people they're not alone. Robert leaned back in his chair, looking up at the stars. "You think Dad would be proud of us?" he asked quietly. I thought for a long moment, listening to the wind. "I think he'd be grateful we found peace, even without him." We sat there until the moon rose high and the night turned still. The house behind us glowed warm with lamplight, filled not with memories of loss, but with something better. Continuity. Love. The quiet triumph of choosing to begin again. Before heading inside, I looked once more at the magnolia tree, its branches swaying gently in the night air. "You see that, Robert?" I said softly. "That tree survived every storm this place ever had." He followed my gaze and nodded. "So did you." And in that small, perfect moment, I realized I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. If you've been following my journey, thank you for walking with me this far. Tell me in the comments, what's your sign of survival? The thing that reminds you you've made it through. Because sometimes the proof isn't in what you've lost. It's in what still blooms. Autumn arrived dressed in gold. The magnolia shed its last blossoms, trading them for leaves the color of burnt sugar and honey. The air grew sharp enough to taste. Every morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen like liquid warmth, catching on the silver frame that held a photograph. Robert, Leticia, and me, standing in front of the foundation's new office. It had taken us 3 years to get here. 3 years of rebuilding, of small miracles disguised as paperwork and phone calls. 3 years of learning that healing isn't a finish line. It's a garden you keep tending, even when the flowers fade. The Sanchez Foundation had expanded across 5 states now. We offered trauma recovery counseling, family outreach, and training programs for nurses who'd faced burnout or violence. Every week, letters arrived from people we'd helped, survivors, mothers, husbands, all thanking us for giving them a place to start again. Robert ran operations now. He had his father's steadiness, but none of his pride. Sometimes I'd watch him from my office window, shaking hands, listening, laughing. He carried light with him now, not guilt. One afternoon, as I sorted through mail, a small white envelope caught my eye. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Scarlett, thinner, older, her prison uniform traded for a counselor's blouse, standing in front of a chalkboard that read, Second Chances Program. On the back, in looping handwriting, thank you for not hating me. I'm trying to be the kind of woman your story would forgive. I sat there for a long time, tears softening the edges of that picture. Then I smiled, because that's what mercy does. It multiplies when you give it away. That night, Robert came over with Mia and Leticia for dinner. We roasted chicken, played cards, and argued over pie flavors like any other family. Between laughter and candlelight, I caught a glimpse of something simple, almost holy, peace wearing an ordinary face. Later, when everyone had gone, I stood on the porch again. The magnolia tree, now bare and quiet, reached its dark limbs toward the starlit sky. I thought about the seasons, about how every year it loses everything, and still trusts spring to return. That's when it hit me. The magnolia was never just a tree. It was a promise that even after betrayal, grief, and loss, there's always something waiting to bloom again, if you give it time, if you give it love. I walked back inside, turned off the lights, and whispered a quiet goodnight to the house that had seen everything. Then I sat down at my desk and began to write one final line in my notebook. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's wisdom, the kind that lets you live without hate, love without fear, and begin without regret. And when I set down my pen, I realized my story wasn't ending. It had simply come home. If you've stayed until now, thank you, truly. Tell me in the comments, what's something in your life that bloomed again after the storm? Because maybe, just maybe, that's what we're all here to learn. How to keep growing, even when the garden seems empty. Winter settled gently that year, a quiet hush over the city, soft snow melting against the magnolia's bare limbs. I had never liked winter before. It always reminded me of endings. But that year it felt different, peaceful, clean, like the pause between heartbeats before a new song begins. The foundation was closing its 3rd year, and our annual benefit gala filled the downtown hall with golden light. People I'd never met hugged me, thanked me, told me my story had helped them leave, heal, forgive. Some cried, some laughed, and all I could think was how strange it felt to be thanked for surviving. Robert gave the final speech that night. He stood at the podium, handsome in his navy suit, the same calm conviction in his voice that had once belonged to his father. "What we've learned," he said, looking out at the crowd, "is that tragedy doesn't have to end us. It can introduce us to who we're meant to become." The applause that followed felt like a wave carrying us both. Him, the man who had come back to life, and me, the woman who had finally stopped living in the shadows of what she'd lost. Later, when the hall emptied, I stood alone by the window, watching snow drift over the city lights. Letitia joined me, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "He looks so much like his father tonight," she said. "He has his heart," I replied, "and his second chance." She smiled, touching my arm gently. "And so do you." I thought about that, long after she left, about how strange it was that pain, when faced, could turn into purpose, that betrayal could become the soil for something far greater, not bitterness, but growth. A few weeks later, on New Year's Eve, Robert and I drove to the coast. We stood on the beach as fireworks bloomed across the midnight sky. The wind carried the sound of the waves like a heartbeat.
"You know what I realized?"
He said softly.
Every ending we thought would destroy us was really just a beginning.
I nodded, slipping my hand into his. We just had to survive long enough to see it. When we got home, the magnolia tree stood silver in the moonlight. Leafless, still, but full of quiet promise. And I knew when spring came, it would bloom again, just as it always had. I sat by the window that night and wrote one final note to myself. Strength isn't what you build when you're fighting. It's what you carry when you choose to keep loving anyway. I closed my notebook, set it beside the window, and smiled. My story wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about resilience, about how a mother's love, once tested, becomes something unbreakable. If you've listened all the way to the end, thank you for sharing this journey with me. Don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Tell me how you've turned your hardest season into growth. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe for more stories that remind us, even in the darkest winters, something beautiful always finds a way to bloom again.